for now, it's just such a pleasure to be here to see students, past students and present students. I look forward to the people attending tonight, visiting us in a few years from now and telling us how classics got them to where they are. Anyhow, let me throw it to each of you. And if you don't mind, Parker, we'll just start with you to just introduce yourselves and what you're doing now and where you are.
Sure. So I graduated Oxford College in 2008 with my associate degree and then my bachelor's degree in Latin in 2010 from the college. Afterwards, I would say I've had a somewhat winding career path. I worked for the Obama White House for about 5.5 years before going to Harvard Business School for my MBA, then working for the restaurant company Sweetgreen as their deputy chief of staff. And then now I work in the New York mayor's office covering infrastructure projects. And so here I am in Greenwich Village right now, and it is cold and clear out. So
I have not assisted any presidents. But yeah, I graduated from Emory in 2012 with a degree in classics. And then I made my way to the Creative Circus, which sounds like I made it up, but it's a real advertising school based in Atlanta for 2 years. It's very pre-professional, and I guess we can talk about that later. But then I moved to San Francisco, where I've been working in advertising, did a little stint in tech, but I'm an associate creative director at an agency here called Argonaut, where right now I'm working on Cricket Wireless. So that's what I've been doing lately.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'm Javaughn Baker. I graduated back in 2015. I got my bachelor's in chemistry and minored in Greek. Shortly after that, I went to go complete a master's at Hopkins in Baltimore. And then after that, I worked for the EPA in North Carolina for about a year. And after that, I started med school, for which I'm at Meharry Medical College in Nashville. And I graduated this year and matched in the residency at Barnes-Jewish, Washington University, in anesthesiology. And that's where I am now, here in St. Louis. So happy to be here this evening and see a lot of familiar faces, Dr. Pratt and Dr. Blakely. And unfortunately, I'm sorry that I didn't get a chance to take any Latin classes, Dr. Master, but it's great seeing you as well.
It's really nice to meet you. And that sounds great. Can I just ask, what did you do your master's degree in at Hopkins?
I went to the School of Public Health and got my master's in health science. You
know, the first thing to ask is how and why did you decide to major in classics or pursue Greek or whatever? I mean, looking back, what were some of the most important courses that you took as part of that process of taking this major or minor? So, Javaughn, why don't you start us off?
Sure. Yeah. So in high school, I took a lot of Latin. That was one of our requirements. We had to take like a foreign language, and it was either Spanish or Latin, and I decided to take Latin. I kind of stuck with it throughout high school. Took AP courses and did pretty well on AP and Latin. And as I was applying for college, I got an email and that was, said I would be a good candidate for a Greek class, and I, a little intimidated by that because I didn't know what that would entail, but I kind of took some faith in it and took an introductory Greek course and I enjoyed it a lot. I enjoyed the translations and the different courses that it would entail. And I think that first introductory course that I took with Dr. Pratt was very instrumental in me deciding to go into Greek. And I also got some that same year I took that's another classics class with Dr. Blakely. That was a little bit surrounding like some of the culture and ancient Greek, and so all of those things combined really convinced me to kind of pursue a minor in this in that field. And so, you know, kind of realized a lot of the medicine, you know, medical terminology kind of, you know, stems from ancient Greek and Latin. So it kind of helps out kind of, you know, piecing those words together. So I think those were some of the most important experiences that I had.
Yeah, that Greek letter is worth its weight in gold. But I want to follow up briefly. Were you already thinking about when you were entering college about majoring into science, or were you thinking, how far ahead were you thinking with what became your major and ultimately your career?
Yeah, so you know, I did know that I wanted to, you know, major in a science. I had already had that, you know, in my mindset, you know, that I wanted to major in the science, but I didn't quite know, you know, what I wanted to minor in, or if I wanted to continue to pursue classics and everything. But I did for a fact, you know that I wanted to keep the science as a major. But you know, I kind of looked at once I was taking those classics courses, I felt that, you know, they were kind of a bit of a relief almost for me, because, you know, it kind of came easy to me. And, you know, I had something to kind of look forward to throughout the day, because, you know, taking science courses all day long, you kind of get tired out, and, you know, just don't really have anything to, you know, kind of look forward to. But I look forward to those classes a lot. Yeah,
that's great. That's fantastic. And Laura, how about you? Other than my class, which you took late in your career, what got you into classics, and how are you thinking about? What was it? What got you going with it?
I think we might be visited by a cat just shortly. But I was the strange high schooler who arrived at college knowing I wanted to go into classics. With my APs, I had already placed out of a lot of sciences. And so I just got to Emory and found the classics version of a class that basically fulfilled every GER, from philosophy and art history to languages. I think I completed a classics major twice over, if I'm being honest. I didn't minor in anything. I just overdid classics. But yeah, I started taking Latin in the 7th grade at my school, and I took it all the way through high school. And I don't know, I knew that's what I wanted to pursue when I got to college. So I never wavered.
Yeah, I was the same way. I got to college already interested in, and didn't stop. What did you take? What did you take as a freshman? What didn't turn? What kept you going though? I mean, you must have started. I mean, I think lots of people arrive at college and they want to do something, and then they start doing it, and they're like, no, thank you. So you must have done something early on that that at the least didn't discourage you from it.
Yeah, I mean, my first semester, I remember I took Greek 101, which was a doozy. I took Comp Lit, covering the Oresteia. I've read the Oresteia so many times in the class. And I think my freshman seminar, I believe with Dr. Pratt, we read the Iliad and the Odyssey. And then I took a math class, and that was really hard. So all of my classics classes were the ones I liked being in, and then math was really hard. I did arrive at college thinking I wanted to pursue music as well. I played the trombone as well. But that part didn't pan out, but classics did.
How about you, Parker?
Sure. I guess I would say that similar trend to everyone else here. I started taking Latin in middle school, and my mom took Latin and was actually big on Latin in high school and involved in the Classics League in Virginia. My little brother took Latin in high school, but when he got to Emory, he chose political science instead and history, but always was passionate about it. I think for me, it was a school of thought rather than just a language. And I really liked the school of thought. And so I came into, I guess, my freshman year thinking I was either going to do history or political science, but I wasn't sold on Latin completely yet. But it quickly became, just because I was passionate about it, something that I just really loved. And all of the classes, I would say, that involved history and art history, surrounding the major were just amazing. So I felt like it was a very holistic major in that sense. It wasn't solely like taking another language. And I'd say for one class that influenced me, it was, I guess it was a writing and Latin class, because after my second year at Oxford, I'd maxed out on the Latin classes, and I took a tutorial with a guy named Dr. Byerly at the time. And he created this curriculum that was amazing, where it was just writing in Latin, and it would take 30 minutes to actually do the sentence right and translate it back the correct way. And that fascinated me, that it was so easy on one side, relatively, of course, to translate to English, but the puzzle didn't work quite the opposite way. So I've always viewed the language as kind of a puzzle piece, almost like a 2-variable math equation, and that there are multiple answers for it. And I like the challenge of that.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. I guess that kind of leads into the second question, which now sort of open it up. And I'm not quite sure, I should have asked this in advance, but at a certain point, people can start asking questions too. I think I don't have to just ask all the questions, though I'm happy to. For the three of you, and what are the skills you think that you cultivated as classics majors, Greek students, and so on, that have stayed with you, or you can kind of see a connection to what you're using in your professional life, and this being an academic setting, we're going to ask for one example of that if you can. But so yeah, what are some skills that you think you developed as undergrads in classics or Greek?
I can definitely say, like, as a writer, the intensive study of both Greek and Latin, which are deeply complicated languages, I think that has made me a stronger writer and made me analyze the structure of a sentence or the structure of what I'm trying to say in a new way. And in advertising, you're trying to write as little as humanly possible to convey as much as possible. And so, that's a strength that I think I've got from just intensive study of a language, is having a better mastery of the English language. Like, I don't think any other advertising writer is going to speak to you about an ablative absolute, but I can. And I think that that's a huge piece. And then I don't think to the same degree as a doctor, but the cognates, and I get assigned naming projects a lot. Like if a brand wants to name a new sub-brand or something, that comes across my desk. And so kind of having those Latin roots or the Greek roots, that's like an interesting way to start a naming project. That's a very small thing, but that is one place where I get to flex a little bit of classics muscle.
And is there an example of a name or a slogan that you have come up with?
Oh, I don't think I have ever even had the winning name. Because there's so many people who work on the assignment, and you just generate lists of hundreds of terms. But we did work on naming Verizon's Visible brand. That was what I worked on, but did not come up with the word visible.
Okay, well, that's a Latinate word, though, so that's we'll take it. Yeah, fellas.
Sure, I'd say without a doubt, I want to echo Laura on this one. Reading and writing skills. And the way you think about language as you read the English language. I think I got probably better as a writer and better experience reading and writing than if I had been an English major, ironically. And I use it every single day. I'm reading constantly in business school because Harvard is all what we call the case method, where you're essentially reading an example of something that happened in the business world, and then you are analyzing it very quickly. And it is very reading heavy. And then as for government, especially, we don't use slide decks, we use memos, and they're very, very complex subjects, especially when I was in the serving the White House, and we would have to do things on foreign policy or complex economic issues. And I think Latin taught me the ability to take something complex, such as the Latin sentence, and to translate it and condense it really nicely and easily into English. And that's a huge skill set in the workplace. I find that so many people these days are great at making a slide deck very pretty, but they can't actually articulate it, and they can't write in a meaningful and thoughtful way. And to add to that point before, not to take too much airtime, but I think it's worth noting that Amazon is one company that is religious about its memos and its writing. And the way that every meeting works at Amazon is you come in with a brief memo who's proposing the idea, and every single person on the team takes a turn at basically writing up and hashing the memo and talking through the idea until they can arrive at some conclusion on a next step. So Jeff Bezos and that team of thought have definitely put a lot of emphasis on writing as a important skill in the business world.
Yeah, I would say just to kind of echo what Parker was saying earlier. When I would translate Greek in those languages, we really we have to piece it together like a puzzle, and that's kind of how you have to approach much of medicine and some of the science research I've done in the past. You kind of have to approach it in a pragmatic way. A lot of patients come with kind of run of the mill symptoms that you may often see, and so you kind of just have to take that step by step and go with analyzing how they're presenting, and then you run your tests, you order your labs, and you treat them appropriately, because there are several guidelines out there that kind of help you work through that. But sometimes you have to kind of go out on your best judgment, and but still having that background of thinking logically and pragmatically and kind of running through all your systems really help you in diagnosing and treating patients.
That's great. That's great. There's a question. Thank you. Is it Bukola?
Yes, it's Bukola. Thank you. I guess one question I'd have, and this is kind of open to everyone on the panel, but specifically people who focused more on classics than sciences, because I know that the conception with Emory is that it's esteemed as a school mainly for STEM, specifically for pursuing scientific careers. So I guess my question would be how did you manage to not trust yourselves in figuring, or at least wanting to know that the classics were something that you wanted to indulge yourselves in order to the passion that you guys wanted to follow? I guess that was my question. I don't know if it's a decent question, but that's been running in my mind.
No, I think that's a fair question. I think that it's very easy in undergrad and when you recently applied to schools to be so wrapped up in the rankings of the different programs individually and what the strengths of each school are. And of course, those are very important when you're making your decisions. But really, in the post-college world, it's about the skill set that you have. And I'm of the mindset that you shouldn't get too wrapped up in whether Emory's STEM programs are slightly better than their humanities programs or perceived that way from year to year, because everything changes so rapidly, and it's more about you and what you get out of it, I think, than it is about how people perceive it.
Yeah, and I think I did feel very odd man out sometimes among my friends who are all pre-med or psych programs or whatever. But to me, it didn't feel like I was in a second class program or anything, because as long as I felt challenged, I felt like I was having the same college experience they were. They were struggling through Orgo and I was struggling through Greek 201. And so I still felt like I was getting the same kind of education as them, just in a different field, and the one that I was much more passionate about. I found it so much easier to pour my time and effort and energy into a class that I found interesting compared to organic chemistry. And no shade to anyone who's taken that class, but it does not hold interest for me.
Can I ask one thing that I heard several years ago from a person that was on some committee at the Society for Classical Studies, and that is that students, alumni, self-report who were classics majors. So this is not just particularly at Emory, that one of the things that they think made the most lasting impact was the greatest exercise they did was not necessarily the thing they enjoyed at the time the most. And that is sitting in class, translating out loud. They felt that was the best preparation for their careers. But they kind of didn't appreciate it at the time. They only saw that with hindsight. So I'm curious, you're our 3-person a focus group on this. Does that ring true or not, or should I entirely change how I teach all my classes?
So yeah, I kind of looked at it, during that time, as having a lot of anxiety because you don't know if you translated everything well or how it kind of shows if you did your homework or not. But I think it does kind of force you to kind of prepare and be prepared, and if you are struggling, being okay with struggling through that, because you have your professor or you have your classmates with you that can kind of help you work through that translation that you may have had a problem with. And it also kind of opens up a discussion. I remember sometimes that we'll get to a point that could have been interpreted a little differently, and so that will open up a discussion within the class. So it wasn't always just purely translating it. We opened up discussion to how certain words could have been interpreted and certain phrases could have been interpreted, and so that was one of the more enjoyable parts of those classes.
Yeah, I think that it has helped me in multiple ways. I would say that first of all, the ability to think very quickly on your feet and under pressure is an important skill set stemming from that. I also think that just speech giving and delivering in general and articulation is really, really important. I found that to be particularly helpful in the business school classrooms where they engage, like I was mentioning, the case method, and you are basically taking a business example of something that happened and spending 90 minutes in the classroom all debating against each other. And so that ability to articulate something very quickly on your feet and think on your feet, almost like a debate type skill, has been really, really helpful. And I found that a lot of students in business school who were either math majors or didn't have that sort of humanities background oddly struggled when it came to a lot of the softer skills of leadership and speaking in public and articulation, whereas they were very good at the analyst type skills of spreadsheets and whatnot.
Yeah.
There's just like a little other piece of helping you build a little bit of a thicker skin, because you got to be prepared to be wrong in front of everyone, which is a huge part of my job, at least.
Right. Yeah. And I'll say as the instructor, I mean, maybe it's very obvious, but there are times that I'm trying to glide past things I don't want to explain or don't feel like I fully have a great explanation for. So it's not just on your side of the room, though we probably have more control about hiding it or misdirecting what you're hearing or looking at. So anyway, okay, great. Now, may I ask you to return to your, and again, please ask questions, everybody. I'm asking all the questions. Oh, so Sophia, please.
Not a question, but just a follow-up. So we've done some of these panels in foreign language departments, and that exercise has come up in different versions in the conversation about how when you're a student participating in that language exercise out loud, it's full of pressure and you don't want to look, silly, or it's a high stakes moment in the class. But we had one panelist in German studies talk really powerfully about how that exercise of translating out loud in class and then also listening to her fellow students' translations taught her how to listen really carefully and how to pay attention to what somebody else was saying as closely as possible. And so I just add that to this really wonderful conversation about the benefits of that exercise. Is we've heard other panelists express that it's been really helpful in teaching them how to listen, and that's shown up in many people's careers after Emory.
Okay, let's go back. And again, please jump in anytime. But when you're in your final year, you're now at Emory, that is to say, you were looking forward to what came next. What were you thinking? I more or less, each one of you has done several things on the way to where you are now. And I'm curious, what were you thinking at that moment in the senior year as that was getting going or whatever, or you were approaching graduation? What were you thinking was next? And how did you do it? How did you go ahead and take that step?
So I, up until I think my junior year, thought I was going to go into academia. That had kind of been my plan. And then senior year, came time for the GREs. Yeah, that one, GREs. I don't know, it just didn't feel quite right. I was quite lost for a few months. And I actually ended up going to networking night that the Career Center put on for writers, because I just knew myself to be decent at writing. And I went, and there was a speaker from the portfolio school I ended up going to, and someone from an ad agency in Atlanta. In full transparency, I was watching Mad Men at the time. And so I decided that advertising seemed like a path. And I honestly went home 2 weeks later, applied to the Creative Circus, and graduated in, graduated in May. By July, I was at the Creative Circus. So it was a pretty seamless transition there.
At the beginning of Mad Men, the first season or two, they emphasized that several of the copywriters or whatever they were called, they were all working on short stories and novels. So that was like, they lost interest in that over the future of the rest of the show. But that's really wonderful. I got to say, Laura, that when I was a senior in college and I knew I wanted to go to graduate school in the humanities, I wanted to go in classics, whatever. I did all this college, whatever. And it was like, I had to take the GRE. I hated that. That was like so insulting. It was like, I've done this body of work, like, take me, don't take me, don't make me take another standardized test. And so I hear you that's a real, it's a sort of a barrier to entry and kind of, anyway, Professor Campbell.
Lara, it's so funny hearing you talk about this, because I feel in some ways we're sort of flip sides of the same coin, because I initially wanted to go into advertising and worked in brand strategy. And I think I was the only person who got distracted by the text they use as a placeholder, which is a passage from Cicero. It's called the Lorem Ipsum, and they use it so that people won't be looking at where the text is going to occupy the space. And of course, they're always being like, why is this passage of Cicero in front of me? And obviously, I did not wind up going into advertising, but I worked in naming for a while as well, and then made that transition fully over into academia. So it's so funny to hear about the journey in the other direction.
The worst part of Lorem Ipsum is when they'll say like, oh, we don't have copy for that right now. We'll just Greek it out. And every part of me just, that's not Greek.
Oh.
That's great. Yeah. What was the question? Oh, that's right. Senior year. Javaughn, what were you? Oh, Parker, you had already unmuted, but no, now Javaughn.
Oh, it's okay.
Were you thinking, you said what you did. Just remind me if you would, what you were thinking when you were senior.
Yeah, I kind of always, knew I wanted to go into medicine, knew I wanted to be a doctor. I kind of knew that, but, the route to get there is quite tough. So, kind of similarly with the GRE, you have to take the MCAT. And, that was one of the, barriers to getting into medical school. So I just kind of felt like, maybe I needed to, become a little bit better in my sciences before, I took that test and did well enough to get into med school. So I went and pursued a graduate degree in health science with a concentration in biochemistry and molecular biology. And then, I worked a little bit and was still kind of hesitant on, kind of thought to myself, well, do I really want to go to med school or do I not? So wasn't quite sure while I was working at the EPA. So I applied to get a PhD in science and also applied to med school at the time. Then I ended up, getting into both. And, that was the big decision. Do I want to go into thousands of dollars of debt to go to med school or get a PhD that will practically be paid for. You know, when I looked at it, I was like, well, what would I be more passionate about? Would I be more passionate about, you know, although I wouldn't be in massive debt getting a PhD, would I be passionate about whatever field I chose to go into? Or you know, would it be worth it getting into, you know, medical school debt by going into medicine, or what I end up being passionate about? Is that something I would look forward to every day? And you know, ended up deciding, yes, I would be. I would, you know, think it would be beneficial for me. I think I would be passionate. I think I'd be happy with the decision, and I don't regret it, you know, one bit. So I think it, you know, it was a little tough journey to get there, but you know, eventually made it, and you know, happy with the outcome.
Yeah, that's great. Have you ever gotten a question about what Greek is doing on your resume?
Oh yes, absolutely, all the time. You know, it's always a great conversation starter, great icebreaker. You know, when you're meeting people, and you know, you always get that. Tell us something about yourself. You know, and I, you know, I say, you know, I minored in Greek. That's my go-to, and you know, it sparks up great conversation from there. And you know, I meet a lot of great people who, you know, may have taken classics or, you know, studied mythology in the past, and so it's always great to talk about that.
Yeah, that's great. Parker, over to you.
Yeah, I think my first response senior year was, oh man, it's over. Okay, what on earth do I do next? Because I had interned for a couple foreign governments while I was at Emory, for the House of Commons in London and for the Bermuda government.
I remember
so I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I actually ended up working, thanks to one of my Emory classmates whose dad was in equity research in New York at the time. And I was an environmental studies minor. And this was back when we thought cap and trade would become a thing and carbon finance would be an actual industry. And because of my classics major and minor, he being of the old school of thought that writing and reading are more important than necessarily the core finance skills, you can teach those, hired me to work in equity research, where I worked for, I'd say, about 10 months, and absolutely just, it was not my thing. I missed government. I missed the passion and waking up every day, feeling that what I did really meant something. And so I ended up starting to cold call the White House switchboard, which is a number you can find online. And I spent 3 months cold calling them until finally I got a voicemail for someone in the equivalent of the HR office. And the rest is history. And I kind of used that strategy because I had done that to get my internships in college, rather than going through the career center. So I was all over the place, I'd say. My head was not sure where I was at my senior year, but I guess I encourage current students to take a deep breath, because things will always work out in some way, shape, or form, but it might not be as linear as you think.
Can I just say that's absolutely wild that you cold called yourself into White House?
Thank you. It was unusual. So.
Bravo.
Yeah. Okay. The last 2 years, we've had like our little graduation thing, the thing where I met Laura's family on Zoom. Obviously, it's not quite the same on Zoom, but I've given twice the version of the same speech, both years, that I actually believe in more than ever, even at the expense of seeming like a total complete dork. And that is that classics should permeate your entire life for your whole life. Not that you have to be reading it or thinking about it, but it becomes a part of you. It's a way of life. And so, and I really mean that. And again, doesn't mean you have to be sitting around practicing your translation of of Plato, but it's part of creating who you are and how you think about the world. So moving away from your career for a second, I'm a little curious about the role that your education in classics and humanities in general play in your life, play in the present, beyond your career. Has it contributed to any of the things you've done, volunteer things, civic activities? I'm also interested, just, and again, it's awkward. I'm not asking you deeply personal questions, but yeah, your perspective or how you think about the world. And just to give you an example, since this, I'm spending all my time reading Seneca now, professionally, and it's really affected how I think about time and my place in time, my children's place in time, my parents, all kinds of things at time, And so that would be an example of one thing. But anyway, it doesn't have to be that. I'm just curious. Maybe the answer is no. You haven't thought about it since you graduated. But yeah, is there any way that it has enriched your life outside of your career?
I think perspective-wise, absolutely. I can think very recently, and what we've all been experiencing for the last 18 months. I think that my perspective on history, how history repeats itself, how the classics have taught me the different, I guess, I would view it as a normal curve of ups and downs of society and the way that things ebb and flow, and that we happen to be in this unique blip of time where, for the first time in 100 years, we were hit by a pandemic. But it was reassuring to me, as someone that studied the classics and is a lover of history, that it's happened before, it will end, and it will happen again at some point. And I think that's an important perspective to keep when everyone is thinking that it's this small moment in time, but you're so absorbed in your own world that you don't view it as the bigger picture of history repeating itself in a natural occurrence.
Well, I do have two cats named Orion and Orestes, so there's that. Yeah. But also, I think it kind of has informed my perspective on like narrative and like what a story means, or like what lore is. I don't want to. It's just, if you have translated the Iliad, the Odyssey, or you've looked at the Epic of Gilgamesh, you see these ancient texts as historical artifacts, as opposed to I don't know, like it has just helped me think about like archetypes and what a story can mean to a culture for an extended period of time. I feel like I'm maybe talking up in the clouds, but that is what came to mind when you talked about this, like just the role of story and culture also.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, I would say for me, definitely perspective. I agree with everyone else's answer. Like, perspective, it definitely helps. But in terms of like just kind of looking at, how you approach like translating everything is, I would go back to that, just like time management. It kind of helps you think about everything like systematically, and, you just kind of, for me, time is very essential and important. It kind of helps me go through my day, like helps me think about, how I need to approach my day, what things I need to do. And it just kind of helps me, kind of break down what I need to go, how I need to approach the day, and helps me be productive, which is something that, kind of take pride in, is making every day productive. But I've really enjoyed, this discussion here. Unfortunately, I have to get off right now. I have to go in, but I really enjoy seeing all the familiar faces and meeting all the new faces as well. So I really enjoyed this time, and best of luck to all you students who are deciding or are in classics. It's a great opportunity. I would definitely encourage you to stay with it, and whatever you choose to do outside of college and whatever you pursue, just kind of be passionate about it. Always remember the classics. If you are choosing to go into pursue that as a major and minor, use that as your springboard, and kind of always reel back into that and kind of, talk about that because people are interested in. So have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Javaughn.
Yes,
Thank you,
thank you.
When you're a doctor, you got it. No one questions why you got to go. That's great. Please, what are some questions from the crowd here? I could do this all night, but I don't think that was the intent. So, Professor Melton.
Can I just ask a more detailed question of Parker, because he came from Oxford, and I remember him well. He was in 2 of my classes, and it's really great to see you. But can I just ask a question about the Oxford and experience versus Emory? Is that
Sure.
That's maybe a little narrow, and how you managed the transition to?
I would say that I was torn when I was applying to schools as to what the right size was. I had spent some summers at Phillips Academy Andover and sort of loved that liberal arts and about that size that Oxford was. At the same time, I wanted the opportunities that main campus offered. But I was a little intimidated by going into them. And so I thought that this was kind of the best of both worlds. And I think academically it was for me. And in that sense, I got 2 very distinct experiences. One that was very much an intimate liberal arts environment with lots of individual attention. And then the opportunities, of course, of Emory's libraries and all of the interesting people, and Atlanta, of course, as well. And I think the 2 years each was actually pretty perfect. I highly recommend to anyone that if they had that opportunity, do it, and I would do it all over again the same way. The attention I got to be in the one-on-one writing, or excuse me, it was only 2 of us in the writing and Latin class, was just incredible. I don't know where else you could get a full class with just 3 people, including the professor. So.
And Parker, I don't know if you know this, Henry Byerly, of course, is still there, still going strong. The program is as strong as ever, and he's still, I think, reasonably well connected, the 2 departments too. So
that's wonderful.
The work goes on. All right, I got one more up my sleeve here, and then you're gonna have to provide them, and that is, what do you wish you had known when you were an Emory student? What do you wish now? I wish I knew then what I know now. So what would that be, or what are some of those things?
I think that I was like, we'd seen this question a little bit before. So really the thing that came to mind for me was a skill. It was just collaboration, because I think the classics field, it's kind of individualistic. You are translating your work, you are doing your research, you are writing your paper. And then when I got into advertising, it's a completely team-oriented place. Like, so I'm a writer, I have a partner who's an art director, and our fates are linked. So I handle the words, they handle the visuals, and we have to concept together. We have to agree on everything. We travel together. Like, it's a team effort. And that wasn't something that came super naturally to me initially. It was definitely a learning curve that I was on when I got to advertising school, and then even out into the real world. So yeah, that's one piece that was a skill I did not have coming out of undergrad.
And can you imagine a way to practice that? I mean, my first thought is that, well, that's maybe something we could do in the classroom with like, I'm just thinking pure translation, just like advanced Latin. Let's go right back. I think it was Caesar and Lucan, Laura, I think. And if we go right back to that class, and yeah, I mean, is there a way, do you think we could work on that in any class, obviously, but to help with that? What or what?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think part of it can be that in classroom, like, collaborative environment of just coming to a group decision on what an answer is. But I also think, like I kind of always had this visual in my head when I was an undergrad of like the B school kids were always in the B school section of the library working at their tables and collaborating, and then everybody else was off in their like individual carrels.
Right.
And so I do think that there's some element of like collaboration with stakes, where you all have to work together in order to make the grade. And because I think it forces uncomfortable situations. Like, so, maybe that's a joint research paper or like obviously not going to do a joint thesis, but I don't know. Like, I think there's something to like a larger project-based piece that has a collaborative nature and the stakes of you must work together or else.
Yeah, that's great. No, and I've often thought over the years that, this is a very solitary, and my job, the faculty's job is in fact very solitary. We want to go off into a room by ourselves, even if there are other people in the room. Like I do a lot of coffee shop work, but and it's nice. Hi, everybody. But then I'm like sitting down and people often say I look insane as I'm like reading something, even with my cappuccino, it doesn't soften the image at all of me like lasered in on my text. So that's a great thing to think about. Thank you. Parker,
Yeah.
What do you say? What do you wish you had known when you were a student?
Oh, I mean, I agree with Laura completely. I think that, I did a lot of this in business school, a lot of joint projects and in all sorts of variations of experiential learning that I think that certain majors, particularly classics, may be a little more, like you said, maybe introverted or honed in, depending on the personality. And that would really help people sort of break out and get those skills. I guess I guess to Laura's point on people being siloed between the business school and the arts and sciences, I felt strongly about this, and I've always been a big lover of the humanities and of a liberal arts degree. But I think that it's very challenging for students because they see and feel so much pressure towards certain career paths and certain majors, and they see the paths as so defined. And I mean, I applaud this initiative in the sense that it helps break down those barriers and helps people realize it's okay to do what you're passionate about. And it will somehow, it doesn't preclude you from doing what you want later in life. So I wish I had known that fully, because I didn't trust myself fully on the decision, but I'm glad I did.
Right.
Yeah, and there's so much of that questioning of like, well, what are you going to do with your humanities major? That doesn't have direct pre-professional like skills. You can do a lot. You can go into advertising. You can go to the White House.
True. So true. Very versatile, whether it's English, history, classics. So
on that subject, I know a lot of people, when they're in the process of career discernment and they're asking themselves those hard questions of, what do I want to do next? What am I passionate about? What is a step I can take on the way toward that passion? A lot of people find it's really helpful to talk to other people, to talk to mentors, to find people in different industries and ask them about their experience, what they've learned, what they wish they had known. Could both of you talk a little bit about the role of that kind of, networking or informational interviewing or relationship building with others in your career trajectory, and any advice you have for students who are also looking to learn about different pathways through other people?
I guess I would say it really is comforting. And it took for me a lot of sort of, as my career has evolved, Wikipediaing, Googling, etc., LinkedIn, like at different people's backgrounds and their trajectories and how they got where they got. And I think it wasn't as clear to me in undergrad that was possible, I think. And I didn't feel like I had sort of that bridge to the alumni world that would, say, hey, it's okay, I'm in finance now, but I was a classics major. And so I think there was sort of a black box to that in a lot of ways, at least for me, and maybe that's on me. I can't speak to Laura's experience on that. So
Yeah, I like networking is not a skill that has ever come naturally to me. And so I think I was very resistant to that. You know, you hear a lot of that your senior year of college, like you got to do networking and cold outreach, and that's how you'll succeed in the world. And I did go to that networking night where I happened to hear two people in advertising speak, and that's what set me on this whole path. But then I did do a lot more. I think I bought into networking a little bit more coming out of the creative circus, because people talked about this endlessly supportive network of your fellow alumni who want to help you succeed in this field. And so I took that to heart a little bit more and started sending my portfolio out for critique to other Creative Circus alumni, and using Creative Circus alumni connections to get into agencies to show my portfolio to creative directors. And I think I maybe should have taken that to heart a little bit sooner, because Emory has a much larger network than the Creative Circus. But yeah, it definitely was real for sure. And it's a huge part of how I got to where I am now is buying into the networking thing. Well, it doesn't have to be the business card in hand, awkwardly standing in a ballroom. It's very much done via email for me.
I think to add to that, when I look back on this, I think about the alumni I interacted with and the people I networked with in looking for my first job. And most of them were either the hiring manager or they were someone more senior. And I didn't feel there was this wall between us almost, in that I didn't feel like they were a confidant or could empathize with me in my situation. They were someone I wanted to hire me and obviously employ me and pay me. And so I think to that extent, very recent alumni being engaged that are starting out in their careers, which is tough because they're busy and they're starting out and spreading their wings somewhat. It could be very helpful to seniors because they're so much closer to having been there than someone who's a vice president at an advertising firm and 15, 20 years out or something that's actually hiring or doing the recruiting.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate hearing that. I'm going to throw a couple resources in the chat for students who are curious about how to go about making some of those connections, how to find people to talk to. Both, like Parker said, those recent alumni who have just very recently gone through a similar experience to you all. And then, people like our wonderful alumni who are more advanced in their careers who can offer some of that long-term perspective. So be sure to copy down these links. And of course, if you have questions, you know where to find me.
So I also think that it's so important to be able to have those conversations externally, and to find mentors and resources to help you think about these processes. But also, I feel like what tends to be less talked about is having these important conversations with yourself and taking your own counsel about how your attitudes and mindsets are shifting over time. Because I remember personally, like, getting near towards the end of my undergraduate career and thinking about next steps, there was a really powerful shift between what I considered opportunities versus obstacles, and thinking about how to distinguish between those two things, and also not being so rigidly committed to the person that you might have been a few months or a few years before. Because I feel like I talk to many students who have committed to being pre-med, and even after they've kind of realized on some level that they're not interested anymore, they still feel like that's a path that they should be committed to. So kind of getting rid of that should attitude and focusing instead on, do I see this as an obstacle or do I see this as an opportunity? And being able to also, as I said, have these conversations with yourself. It sounds a little cheesy, but something that I found really valuable when I was trying to figure out my own career path, which was not by any means linear towards academia.
Yeah, I feel like I had that conversation with myself even last year, because I'd been in advertising for 7 years, and then I, mid-pandemic, took some time off because the world was on fire. And then, in that time off, I was like, what if I get out? Sorry, I live next to a hospital. But what should my next step be? Like, and there was that like sunk cost element of like, well, I've been in advertising for 7 years, so should I keep going? And so then I moved and I tried out tech for a year. And so I was at a tech company here in San Francisco for a year, just to see what happens, because, there's no should. You don't have to be in the same industry for your entire career. I think there's like stats that we're all going to change our jobs like 8 times or something like that. So yeah, 100% agree.
Yeah, thanks, John. Mostly, I just wanted this isn't a question so much, but I'm so grateful for both Laura and Parker and Javaughn for talking really openly about what, I remember as an undergraduate humanities majors years ago being the tooth grinding reality of what are you going to do with that? It was that way all those decades ago. And the students who come to my office, it's still resoundingly the same question. And I think, congratulations to both of you for articulating so clearly that the question is not as productive as the positive affirmation of what is it that drives you, and what is it that, for against all advice, seems intriguing and makes you want to get out of bed and do your homework in the morning. You've done a beautiful job of articulating that. If it's any consolation, I don't know of anybody in any generation of this field that hasn't had at least some degree of addressing the worried parents who are saying, you are never going to get a job. This is not why I'm paying for you to go to school. But you guys have done a brilliant job demonstrating that there are branching pathways out. And just thank you so much for all you've done in sharing your time with us.
Yeah, that reminded me, I went to a specifically classic study abroad program, and I still have 4 of my best girlfriends from that trip. And so there's the 5 of us, and all of us have taken 5 drastically different paths. So I'm in advertising. We have someone who has a master's in library science, which is a children's librarian in Boston. We have someone pursuing her PhD in psychology at the University of Chicago. We have a doctor in Philadelphia, and we have one single classics PhD out at Stanford. So there's a lot of different paths from one study abroad program.
That's amazing. That's a great trajectory.
Yeah, for a long time, I was like, I'm the only one not still in school. So that part's fun.
Well, to your point, you're right. I do often get when people read my resume or ask me what my major was, and I tell them Latin, and they're like, Latin? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Let me count on, both hands, the different skills I got from that are, in my mind, some of the most practical skills you can get anywhere. So I feel like sometimes people are afraid to own it with their parents, so to speak, and follow their passion on that, but I highly recommend it. So
yeah, I think the piece that's jumped out for me in this call even is just following what makes you curious is going to get you somewhere. So advertising made me curious, and now I'm in a field where I can be curious about my new client or my new target audience, or whatever insight I'm working off of that day. And so that brings in the research, and it brings in critical thinking, and so you get to kind of investigate whatever you're working on a daily basis, which is, I think, part of the allure of classics. And that was the thing that always did it for me, was like the deep research and writing up my findings. And so I think that following that has served me in good stead, I suppose.
I think back, Laura's class, the Caesar Lucan one, is sort of memorable. It was reasonably small. It had a few people, and the people that I know what they're doing out of that class. This was advanced Latin. So it was, one is a librarian in Boston, but not the same person that you're referring to, I guess. Andra is the one I'm thinking of. It's a guy that works for Google, was in that class. There's a Latin teacher, a Latin high school teacher. Those are the 3 that I know of, plus Laura working in advertising. So I think that illustrates right there just the variety of careers that, one person did go into Latin for a career, but that's 25%. I'm fairly certain at least one other person didn't, though I don't know exactly what she's doing. But I think, unless there are any final questions, this has been wonderful and really amazing to hear from the both of you and Javaughn. Oh, Professor Melton.
I do want to commend you on the courage that you had, really, and because that's an important part of it, and maybe that's the translating in class, which is very stressful. I understand your students may have trained you well for that, but I mean, cold calling all kinds of places is very courageous, and the same for Lara. I haven't had Lara, but so I commend you for that. Courage is a big virtue in the innate and other stories that we have read. But you really have, aside from all the other qualities, you have shown that. So I just want to commend you on that. I really think that's great. Thank you. That's all I wanted
Thank
to
you
say.
so much.
Well, fantastic. Thank you all very much for coming. This has been really, really informative. I hope you all felt that way too. And Parker and Laura, thank you so much. It's really wonderful to see you again. We look forward to hosting you on campus in some form when we get back to that in a more normal way.